our panelists today are being joined by Kim, Morgan, Ben, and Mark. We'll have a ton to say about what it takes to really build brands that last, allow you to have loyal customers, and really long-term business success, which I think is why everyone is tuned in today. So before I launch into questions and start the dialogue with this great group of folks, I love them to introduce themselves so you know what they've done, what they are currently doing, and just to get to know them a little bit. So Kim, why don't you kick us off?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. This is Kim Malek. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Salt and Straw Ice Cream. We have 40 shops. We started in 2011, my cousin and I, with an ice cream cart in Portland, Oregon. And we're up and down the West Coast, a location in Disneyland. Disney World brought us to the East Coast. We have a handful of locations in Miami and some shops coming. We just announced in New York City. So it's a big year ahead for us. We only sell our ice cream through our retail shops and try to be a great community gathering place. And we are working to spark the human spirit through unbelievable joy. And that's what we're all about. Excited for this conversation.
Ice cream always brings me unbelievable joy. So I can't wait till you come to Cleveland because it will make me very happy. It's a regular, especially as the summer approaches. Ben, Ben would love you to introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Also chiming in from Portland, Oregon. I'm Ben Hennes. I'm the Chief Creative Officer and one of the co-owners of Happylucky. We are an independent and queer-led creative agency headquartered in Portland, Oregon, with locations both in LA and New York as well. We partner with both local brands as well as some of the biggest brands in the world, really focused on building radically inclusive, heart-led experiences that connect brands with audiences and communities through brand strategy, campaigns, content, and IRL connections are a real focus for us. So excited for this conversation about building trusted brands.
Thank you, Ben. And Mark, will you tell the folks about yourself?
Morning, afternoon, everyone. Yeah, I'm in Chicago today. I'm CMO for Rentokil Terminix. Rentokil is probably not a brand you've heard of too much in the US, but out there in about 90 countries across the world. We have 85 brands in North America, and so relevant for the conversation today, from the local ones to the national ones, just as Ben was saying, large and small, and you get a different appreciation of the role you play as an influencer and a marketer when it comes to the size and position of your brand. So looking forward to talking to you all about it today.
Thank you, Mark. Terminix is very close to my heart. Unfortunately, I'm in the Midwest and the bugs are out. So, so I know that story all too well. And Morgan, will you, last but certainly not least, tell everyone about yourself?
Hi, good morning. Excited to be here. I'm Morgan Higgins. I'm the Director of Social Media and Consumer Public Relations for Jack in the Box, located in San Diego. But really excited to talk today about the balance of a large corporation and then our local branding efforts. We are 96% owned, franchise owned. So it is a balance of kind of keeping that large brand story, but then how do you tailor it to each of our individual markets? So really excited to talk about that today.
Great. Well, let's get into it. And I want to kick it off with Kim at Salt and Straw, because this brand is growing and has really built a reputation for telling just unique stories through ice cream, which is exciting. So as you grow, like, how do you ensure the brand story really remains genuine and engaging as you grow into new markets?
Yeah. So we just announced, as I said, that we're opening an exciting new market this year in New York City. And as we've grown outside of Portland, it would have been really easy to just make the same flavors and send them out to all the cities that we do business in. But we kind of exported this idea that's central to, I think, the ethos of Portland as a city. I don't know if you've seen Portlandia, but a lot of that, I hate to say, is true. Like, we're fanatical about the details of where things are from and who made it. And, you know, I think, you know, when we started in 2011, we were fortunate as we started to kind of export that idea. It really resonated with people. Like, people want to look beneath the surface and know what's going on with the brand and who's part of it, who are the people behind it. And so when we open in new cities, we always say, like, growth doesn't have to mean mass sameness. And we announced we were opening in New York. We'd been on the ground working to get ready for that, no exaggeration, for about 6 years. So getting to know the local market, working on local collaborations, you know, whether it's a chocolate maker, a tea maker, local chefs, breweries, the largest edible bug farm in the United States. And so, like, really leaning into getting to know these folks and working together to create their stories through ice cream. And when we announced we were opening there, I think we had 500 people in line for our pop-up before we even started. And we showed up and got to know each one of those 500 people. And so, you know, I think even though we're growing and we have 40 locations, which isn't a lot, as Morgan said, it could be a lot bigger, but we treat every single store in every single market like it's our first. And we have a saying, you know, that we want to offer full face attention to people. We don't get that very much in our society nowadays. And we want to earn every single right to grow. So we got to earn it. And that comes in a lot of different forms. And we look ourselves in the eyes and ask, like, why are we doing this? What's this about? What's in it for the community? What's in it for our guests? What's in it for our team? And that's where those growth decisions come from.
Wow, so many. I have two quotes now. Growth doesn't mean mass sameness. I've never heard that before, but I really like that when you think about just being original and being originating from the area as well, as it sounds like you're doing from New York. And full face attention. I want us to do that when we're driving, when we're eating dinner. I think that one applies across the board. So
It
definitely we'll make
does.
note of that, right?
I like that. Yeah, practicing that with each other. I think it's what the future's about. So we really don't. I mean, people are almost taken aback when they experience at our shops. One customer said it's like the anti-rush. Like, you took a couple extra minutes to look me in the eye and just spend time. And I mean, teaching, quite frankly, you know, folks who are in their teens or 20s to do that as our, you know, team members is a cool thing too, because it's not something we all experience routinely, or taught to do kind of nowadays. Not like
Wow.
back in my day.
Such a great ethos. I love it, Kim. Switching over to you, Mark, but not moving far from Portland. I know Happylucky is a creative agency really built on authenticity. And so could you share a strategy or maybe a campaign that exemplified how authenticity and marketing can lead to a deeper connection with the audience?
Yeah, I think, Mark, I'm going to steal this. I think she meant Ben, but since I'm here in Portland, all good.
Sorry, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, I think authenticity is a toughie. It's become such a buzzword in our industry and marketing circles. I think we're often wielding it around as kind of this catch-all, unspecific strategy, if you will. But this idea of being more authentic it's kind of hardly a game plan. It kind of gives us permission to overlook what's very hard work of knowing your brand. Kim, sounds like you've done that hard work to truly understand your ethos and your reason for being. But knowing that origin and also your future, knowing how you talk to people and how they talk about you when you're not in the room, knowing why your audiences are choosing you over others. You know, to say we need to be more authentic is kind of akin to cheating on an answer without knowing how you do your math. And yet, even as we squint at it kind of being overused, we really feel its importance so deeply. And I think, as you mentioned, as a queer-owned and led agency, authenticity really rings super personal to us, as we're intimately familiar with this idea of an imperatively showing up unapologetically, in our full truth. I think as the queer community, we're forced to kind of face those questions of identity in a way that mass culture and mainstream culture isn't always. So to us, the most important step of being authentic is that deep work of knowing what authenticity even means for your brand. It's about knowing what your brand really stands for and embodying those values super consistently, and being willing to own that position, even if it's not for everyone. I know as business owners, it can be really scary to actively choose to alienate an audience. But I believe in order to be truly authentic, it's really the only way to show up for the audiences that you truly want, whether that's your consumers or your employees. And yeah, just to use an example, because we kind of straddle this duality. We have our own brand ethos as an agency, but a lot of what our work is centered around is helping other brands understand their brand story and connect with audiences in an authentic way. So the Adidas Community Initiative, it's part of their United Against Racism platform, serves as this kind of prime example of how authenticity in marketing creates strong, can kind of create those strong audience connections. And we've been working with Adidas as they acknowledge the kind of vital role of the Black community as one of their cultural cornerstones of their brand. And they've kind of recognized that this past reliance on BIPOC culture without adequately supporting that community. And we've helped them kind of reverse their approach by prioritizing meaningful engagement over unspoken appropriation, and help them create this kind of full educational curriculum and event series that's really focused on engaging younger BIPOC audiences, educating them around sneaker and creative culture, which they're participating in, and giving them opportunities for education and exposure and access to that culture. This kind of shifts this shift highlights the brand's understanding that progress isn't a destination, but an ongoing commitment. And through this kind of sustained support of BIPOC communities, they're showcasing a dedication to authenticity, focusing on deeper connections, and with their audience based on this kind of shared values and mutual respect. So I think that idea of authenticity is about showing up daily, showing up for communities and truly connecting with them, and not this kind of buzzword of, how are we being real in this moment?
I love that, Ben. It sounds like there's part of this where, you kind of look in the mirror at yourself and at your company and say, how are we showing up? And then the companies you're working with really allow them to take that next step. Because I think it's one thing to put out a branding campaign, but it's really another thing to walk the walk, which it sounds like, Adidas is doing. So really great story. Thanks for sharing that.
Absolutely.
So Mark, pest control, kind of a different world, but certainly one where trust and reliability are really paramount, right? Coming into people's homes, providing this kind of service. How does Rentokil Terminix use storytelling to really build and maintain trust with customers?
Yes, thanks, Kadecia. And Ben, thanks for picking up with that last question. It wasn't one I was ready for, so it's appreciated. So I think for us, trust is really, it's a really interesting concept. I've been talking about it. We've got my leadership team together the last couple of days, and we're talking about that. And we've got a brand that nationally many people will know about, which is great to have on one hand. On the other, the challenge we have is that people can't relate to it, and they don't want to engage with it. So we're putting a lot of effort into, a little bit like what Ben was saying, and indeed Kim, we've got to be in the mindset of the person when they're choosing pest control. And you're not always thinking about pest control, always thinking about ice cream for whatever reason, but pest control is one of those things, maybe Midwest now, people want it, mosquitoes are starting to flourish, your termites are out. So people, it's front of mind now, but they want to go to local people that they know. So as a national brand, our biggest challenge isn't me creating an advertising campaign nationally, but is is bringing it to life for the people. And for me, when you talk about trust in business, I think with all the fake news, everybody dealing with things online, so much transactional activity now, it's actually how do you bring it to life with our frontline colleagues for the people in the communities? And that's where we're looking, no matter what size your business is, it's the people that will trust you, and you've got to kind of gain their respect by being there. So we're putting a lot of effort into communities, using testimonials and reviews, because people believe people. Advertising works so far, it gets your awareness, they'll consider you, but actually to step over that kind of line and convert the opportunity into a sale, I think for any business, whatever size, and that happens for our small business as well, that sit in single city or town communities. It's about how they can get in front of customers on a regular basis. A ball game on a Saturday morning where there's parents talking about the pest problems, those kind of things. So I think for me, simply put, trust is about having the people on the front line living your brand with the people that can be and are your customers. It's about the people, really, Kadecia, for me.
Yeah, it's really like interesting to think about that. Like pest control is not something people really want to think about, right? It becomes something maybe you have to think about unless you're in that preventative mindset. I saw a big black ant crawling across my floor this spring, and I said, "Uh-oh," and so it becomes top of mind really quickly. And so it's almost about, it sounds like, Mark, like capturing that moment, right, when people are having this conversation and getting Rentokil Terminix right there.
Yeah. And it's understanding people have got pests, are quite disgusted about it. If you're a business owner, it's got risks associated with it, but people have got a home and they see pests in it, there's a little bit of shame that you've got pests in there. And so part of it's the trust, but also being there in a way that, I guess, empathizes with the emotion that people go through. So it's important.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I must be shameless telling, 600 people about my ant issues, but Morgan, I'd love to hear more about your experience at Jack in the Box, and want to start this question with you and perhaps opening up to everyone. Can you talk about a time where the brand faced a challenge or a crisis and how you leaned into authentic storytelling and marketing to really address and rebuild trust with the customer?
Yeah, I mean, being in charge of PR, we've dealt through a lot of that. But I think, I wouldn't tack it to one specific event. I mean, there's many different crises at different levels, and it really is representative of like what that individual restaurant experiences in their marketplace. And I think sometimes, one crisis could be not as big of a crisis to another organization, but in the food industry, you're constantly running into these types of problems. So, what we do is, we have a very robust crisis process while we work. Most importantly, kind of similar to what Mark was saying, is like, we're all about listening to like the customers, because our customers are in places like California, Texas, Pacific Northwest, we have some in North Carolina. It's a very different customer base. So the crisis could vary. And the way you react to that is going to be tailored to what specifically A, happened, but B, how that customer is handling those types of situations. And it could be something as small as, not getting a refund on an order when they tried to do it through a mobile app order. But you want to become one-to-one with that customer so that you can help to alleviate the problem, instead of being that big corporation with 2,200 locations and just blanketing out, okay, hey, this is what we do, and feeling more robotic. We really try to make sure that we have that one-to-one, dependent on every single specific communication that we have with them.
I love to hear that approach. How have other of you dealt with this? I know, Kim, you're a growing brand, so I imagine there may have been some bumps along the way.
Yeah, I mean, anytime we come up against a tough situation, our number one, and this isn't just for tough, this is for anything. Like, I don't think of our communication strategies as selling something ever. I think of our communication with our guests as I mean, not to be trite given the topic of this, but as storytelling and being unbelievably transparent. People can sniff in a hot second if you're not, and so it's not worth doing. Don't even think about it. Just, people can handle the truth, tell the truth, own up to what's going well, what's not going well. And I always tell my team, like, look at what you're sharing and communicating. Like, would you say this to a good friend? I mean, does this seem like something you would literally send as a text message or an email or post on your social media? Or does it seem like some sort of like corporate bullshit that's like trying to pull the wool over my eyes? Or I know the ice cream lady's probably not supposed to cuss, but um just like be real, speak in the real talk and tell the truth, and do that with in the good times to build trust, and do it in the hard times to be open. And I also, like, I personally lean into hard conversations and questions as the CEO and founder. If a customer or a guest or a partner or a team member has a problem or an issue or some feedback, I stay really close to that stuff, and I will personally get on the phone and hear people out. And, sometimes we disagree, but I generally learn something. And the idea of listening, I think, is kind of an lost art and incredibly important.
Great. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Mark or Ben, any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I was just a few things resonated. Both kind of from everyone, Morgan, Mark, and Kim. What Kim was saying and holds true to kind of our approach is brand building to me is essentially relationship building. And you want to get as close to that one-on-one relationship as you can. And Mark, when you were talking about being a national brand, but wanting to connect with people on that local level, we've been working on an event series with DoorDash and kind of say, as they face similar problems, a brand that started from kind of humble beginnings. The CEO's mom owned a restaurant in the Bay Area, have grown into this massive tech company as many people view them. But really their origins are about trying to connect and uplift local economies and local businesses. But that's not their brand perception at this point in time. And so this event series is really about reconnecting with their merchants. We're going into, some of their second, third, fourth tier markets into these restaurant communities, thinking about how we show up, have listening sessions with their merchants, understand their real problems, connect and understand the economies that they're ultimately trying to be a part of and trying to uplift, to understand their unique problems, because to what Morgan was saying, the problems in Savannah, Georgia versus the, communities in Monterey, California can look very different from one another, and how DoorDash can show up, connect with them, and ultimately provide solutions are really different. But that it's necessary to have those one-on-one conversations. It's necessary to hear those challenges and those issues, and then be able to kind of figure out how you're adapting your brand while staying true to it and staying true to your story, but figure out how you're connecting with those audiences. So I just felt that was relevant to kind of the conversation.
I love that. Could I add one quick thing to that? I think that, that's a perfect example. And quite frankly, even on Yelp, we get this on a daily basis. You get this sort of feedback that can feel hard. And I think as a business owner, your initial, or team member, your initial reaction is to like be defensive and protect yourself. And it's always fascinating and so beneficial to me when instead, as you're describing, Ben, we lean into it and embrace those hard questions and situations. And like we have a saying, like, I'm on your side. Regardless if we disagree, or like, I'm on your side, like, we're going to figure this out. And to make people genuinely feel that way, and to collaborate on the right solution, I think is what I hear you describing. And it's so rich and can move you forward so much further.
I want to add one more thing too, because I think it's even more interesting, because listening into that customer, like, we pride ourselves at Jack, despite having so many locations, just constantly looking at what the customers are saying. I mean, not just reviews, not from a customer service standpoint, but from like a content development standpoint, product innovation. Like, your customers are coming to you with unprompted like advice and information that is actually so rich for you as like a marketing individual to take back and build something authentic. Because again, that's where the true authenticity is because that's what your customers are saying. And it doesn't always have to be a customer service experience or a crisis that's happening. It could be just little fun, like truths about your brand that you don't necessarily know because you're not putting yourself in the shoes of your customer.
Yeah, it's interesting because the bit Kim mentioned about being defensive, I just think that's when you get into a bigger company, you get all of that different functions having different views on what's right and wrong, and then marketing having a view. But I was just listening to I guess Morgan and Ben was saying there is every human wants to be listened to. It's just nature, and building that authenticity and building that, no matter how big your business is, demonstrate that you can be a listening organization. Actually, it's one of the most powerful marketing things you can do. And just admitting you made a mistake, kind of rectifying it, or thanking someone for feedback, and then going after it. As Kim says, you do it as a CEO because you're interested. That's price. It's free feedback. I mean, at the end of the day, we pay for it. We're doing research here, but it's priceless. And so I think just demonstrating listening is one of the best and most important things you can do, no matter how big your business is, and then acting on it is a proof point, and that authenticity to what Morgan was saying. So.
Yeah, I love that it's all just pointing back to listening and to people. It's a very simple thing. I think it can be employed in any business at any size, whether it's local or global. So love to hear you all really just pointing in that direction for a takeaway. To switch gears a little bit, when we're thinking about digital marketing, there's so many platforms to choose from when you think about storytelling and getting the brand message out there. And I think one of the things that people face is, how do you decide which channels are going to be the best to help you really, deliver authentic communication and effective communication? Ben, let's start with you. I know you work with a number of brands. Would love to hear how you kind of think through this question of working with a brand and kind of figuring out, what platforms, what channels, and what kind of communication makes the best sense in the digital world.
Yeah, absolutely. Weirdly enough, it goes back to listening and really understanding your audience and understanding their behavior. And I think it's about showing up where they are and understanding their native behaviors on that platform. I think it's also important to have a mix, as we're seeing the conversation around TikTok happen. I think we can't, as brands, over prioritize or over index on one single. But I think you kind of understand your audience, probably based on their age, their location, their behaviors, kind of what they're ultimately looking for and how they're utilizing those platforms. So I think it starts there. And then once you understand those platforms, I think it's about creating content that's platform specific. We got to move away from the slice and dice approach of kind of creating one piece of content and thinking that that's going to work across all of your platforms, because the behaviors are different. The way people are consuming content on those platforms is different. So really need to be thinking about how we're creating content that's platform specific, and showing up where your audience ultimately is.
And that, just building on that, Ben, I think that last sentences were the most important, because there's so many platforms, you could create so much content, but really kind of being clear in your business who your target audience is, and then you can build content for the platform and the channel that you want to use, because different age groups, different ethnicities, different backgrounds, different parts of the country, the kind of how they consume the media is so different. So really honing in onto your target customer, I think that's your first point, and then you build your content through that. That's what we're trying to do as well, but it's never easy, but it's certainly a priority.
I also,
Yeah.
sorry,
go ahead.
adding one thing. I think that's also like it's not necessarily like a linear answer, because content consumption is also changing like every single day, like every minute of every single day. So like as a business owner or a brand leader or someone within your organization, you also have to kind of keep a pulse on what, what is that content? Where are they looking at it? And it might be one thing one day, and kind of like Ben said, like TikTok, it's going through some things. You have to be able to be ready to start to pivot and be able to still keep that communication, so you don't lose and you're not listening to them anymore.
Yeah, and on that, what Morgan said, I think what's important is people consume media at a pace now that we wouldn't have imagined 10 or 15 years ago. So you've got to be there, but you've also got to be there in a timely way as well. So once you've got your target audience and you've decided where you're going to be, you've got to have a response that can actually be there within 12 or 24 hours, because after that, people have moved on to the next big thing or the next piece of news. So I think it's really important that it's timely as well, and that you've got people tracking and watching these platforms.
Yeah. If I could just add one thing to this as well, I find sometimes with our team, and I know a lot of folks on this event, are restaurant owners and retail owners. And I find with my company, oftentimes too, I have to remind people of this balance. Like, we exist in the real world too. And especially your support functions and, marketing, and you can get really caught up in like perfecting your content plan and doing all your social media. And then I'm like, okay, but we have real stores where people are coming in by the hundreds. And what's our communication plan to them? And what are you doing, in that world to make sure that it's a balanced experience? We can forget that that's not our, I always say that's not where our business really lives. For us, it's not, we're not a digital business where we have ice cream shops where we're living, breathing people come in and see things in the real world. So just that balance, I think, is important.
Yeah, I love that, Kim. Two builds real quick. One is that I think IRL for many businesses, if you don't have a brick and mortar shop, is overlooked as an important communications channel in itself, as an important content engine for your digital media. The other thing to build on what Mark was saying, agreed that you've got to be paying attention and engaged in those conversations. But I think part of authenticity is also understanding the conversations you do become a part of and the ones that you don't need to become a part of.
Yes.
The audiences aren't necessarily asking you to be a part of. And I think we've gotten, especially in the world of purpose marketing and all of these things, there kind of became this culture around cancel culture that, I have to show up in every moment or else I'm going to get called out for not showing up. And I think we're moving away from that. And part of like being true to your brand, having a really strong brand ethos, is developing that understanding with your audience that, this isn't our moment to show up, so we're not going to, but this is when we show up, and this is when we show up for the audiences and the communities that we're a part of.
Yeah, that's such a good point with with the fast pace of things that kind of just constantly changing. We have a little bit over 5 minutes left, so if there's any questions from the audience, feel free to write them in the chat, see if we can get them answered. We did have one come in, which I think is great. When we think about measurement, and the question is, how do you measure brand sentiment? How can you tell that your efforts are working and your customers do trust your business as you try to stay authentic? So I'd love to hear, how do you know this is working at the end of the day? I'll kick it over to Morgan to start. I see your lips starting to
I was
move.
gonna say I can start. I think the big, for us is, again, going back to listening to individuals. Yes, I work for a very big corporation, 2,200 restaurants. Like, we do have all the brand metrics. We go through all those stuffs, but like at the end of the day, what we are actually finding is like, when we see more positive conversations come into our social platforms or on our Yelp pages and at a local level, that is a true measurement for us of how the sentiment is in real life. Yes, we could do all these massive tests and measurement scores and things like that that say we're doing this right and this not right. But I don't think it is as authentic as we do from like just pure listening to the customers on social channels and getting an idea of like, okay, the sentiment is, you know, gearing a little negative in this situation. What are the key themes that may be doing this? Can we take that theme and bring it back to our local restaurants, retrain them on, you know, a cooking pattern that might not be going over well? Or is it a customer service experience that they're having? So now we need to retrain our restaurants on like better customer service. That is where we can actually get into the nitty gritty. So we're measuring it more on like a qualitative sentiment and like deep and different types of like topics, so that we can actually take it back and make real actions versus, you know, qualitative numbers of engagements and brand mentions. Like sometimes those are just numbers on a piece of paper, but you can't necessarily take action against them.
100%, Morgan. We like to call those vanity metrics. I
Yes,
think
I
everyone
call them
loves
vanity. Yep.
to plaster up the billion impressions or whatever that really mean nothing. And what Morgan's referring to is as that true listening. We like to call them memory metrics. Like, what are those things that are going to stick with audiences long term? And they are hard to measure, and it requires sometimes developing relationships that last over time. A lot of our work with brands is about long-term community engagement, building communities that become your trusted kind of barometer for your brand, if you will, that you can be having real conversations with, understanding how their perception of your brand is shifting. You know, probably in Kim's work, it's who's that customer that's coming in twice a week that you can have those real conversations with, and they can kind of be that barometer you of like, hey, Kim, you kind of went on track on this one, or what's with this new ad? It feels like you've lost your way a little bit.
We 100% do that. Like we call them super fans, and there's a panel of them, and we talk to them. They'll reach out and unsolicited with good and constructive feedback, and they'll even attend like our general manager meetings and say what they love, what they don't. So you're right. You don't have to be like overly scientific or formulated about this or spend tons and tons of money.
Interestingly enough, so like flipping it on its head, because we again have like a corporate run, we actually require every single person that works in our corporate to go into a restaurant for at least one day and work in the restaurant, so that they can really get to know like the customers that come in. What is the experience? What are the employees saying too? So I still think that like even as a mid-size or a large organization, there's opportunities for you to actually get on the front line and see the truths and listen to the customers, and then kind of bring that back to your corporate side or your marketing directors and say, hey, how can we actually take this and make some sort of action against it?
Yeah, I think that's important. I was talking to one of the founders of Soul Cycle once, and she said early in the Salt and Straw's trajectory, she said, don't ever get fooled into thinking that your corporate office is your company. She said, I learn the most. I go into the bathroom when a class gets out, and I just wash my hands for a really long time. And I hear everything that everyone thinks. And for us, that's like, I go stand in line, you know, whenever I'm in a city, I wait in line and I hear what everyone's saying and what their experience is. And you're exactly right, Morgan. And our leadership team does that at least once a month. We go work in our shops and hear what's going on and report back.
I love this. This advice is shaping up. And so we're at the near the end, but before we go, I would love to hear from each of you. What's one piece of advice you would share to a small business owner or a mid-sized business owner on how to really start building an authentic brand today? So what's your sound bit for how to go out and get it? And Mark, let's kick it off with you.
I think for me, it's just demonstrate you're listening to your customer.
Got it. What about
what
you?
I was going to say.
Listen.
I think you just got to listen. You got to listen to the audience. They're telling you what they want and what they don't want, how to market to them, how to communicate with them. Just listen. It doesn't matter the size that you are.
Yeah, I think to build on that, I do think it's important, and that was a little bit the second half of my answer. But the first half is, I call it slow down to speed up, is you got to start with a really strong foundation of who you are, because that helps you make decisions way faster once you have that and you truly know who you are and how you show up and who you show up for. And then it's about taking your blinders off and getting out of your kind of insular conversation and opening up to understand what that perception of your audience is. And both of those working in tandem with one another are super vital.
Yeah, I guess I would just add to that, and kind of in a similar vein, Ben, is don't be afraid to say no. Like what you say no to is probably more important even than what you say yes to. And as is related to that, especially for, the founders in the room, be careful what advice you take. Like, I think as Roy was saying, like, and, you chasing after kind of, fear-based things and listening to kind of all the noise out there. Just remember to stay in touch with what you know to be true and what your foundation is.
So much good advice. Thank you, Kim, Ben, Mark, and Morgan, for sharing your experience and joining us today. We have lots more great content in store, so I'm going to pass it back over to Emily. And big thanks to all of our panelists. We appreciate you joining and sharing your knowledge.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for having us.